Good evening, and welcome to the 2021 City of Renton City Council Candidates Business Forum. My name is Carmen Goers. I'll be your moderator for the evening. The questions tonight will reflect the interests and concerns of the business community here in Renton. The speaking order of the candidates was determined by a random wheel, so it will not be the same order each time going back and forth, just so the candidates are aware and can be prepared. With the time that we have tonight, we have a lot of questions to go through, but we will start off with 2 minutes of personal introductions, followed by 90 seconds for most of the questions, sometimes 60, and then 2 minutes for each closing statement. Mind you that the candidates are here to represent their thoughts about the city of Renton. In the moderator's discretion, yours truly, there may be an opportunity for rebuttal as time permits or additional questions as follow-up. So we will be having a speed round, a bonus question in which each candidate can ask their opponent one question, and a few questions to get to know the candidates better. We want to thank the candidates this evening for their time, their talents, and their energy, and the participation in this process. Thank you to our studio audience here for your attendance and in advance for your cooperation and courtesy to the candidates. So candidates, once the question is read, your clock begins. You will see a yellow card when there's 30 seconds remaining and a red card when your time has expired. So I do not cut you off, but I do remind you of your expiration time. So please don't be offended in advance. So we're going to start with 2 minutes of introductions for you to tell us what we should know about you, who you are, and why you are running. Please note there will be additional questions and an opportunity to emphasize on your top priorities. Our introductions will begin with Joe. Your time begins now.
All right, thank you and welcome everybody to the candidate forum. So my name is Joe Todd and I'm running for Renton City Council position 1. My background begins in Mobile, Alabama. My father was a part of SNCC and he marched with Dr. King. And so I was put to bed with stories about civil rights and activism and standing up for injustice. And so that's one of the main reasons that I'm running for Renton City Council, is that I want to make sure that marginalized and vulnerable communities have a voice. I have a background in public service. I was the Chief Information Officer for the City of Tukwila, and I'm currently the Deputy Chief Technology Officer for King County. And what that means for the community is that I will be able to bring nuts and bolts experience to getting things done for the city of Renton. I come in with a majority of the city council as endorsements, which means I'll hit the ground running and making sure that policy is getting passed. And number one, I'm here for the community. I want to meet you where you are. I want to work with the community. I want to work with the businesses. I want to make sure that Renton grows and thrives. That's a bit about me, and thank you guys for being here tonight.
So Joe, just can you clarify, you mentioned SNCC. Can you tell people what that means?
So SNCC was actually started by John Lewis, and it was a student-led organization where they actually did sit-ins during the time of civil rights, where like in Woolworths, those types of organizations wouldn't actually let black folks actually eat in restaurants. And so my father was a part of that, and he also marched with Dr. King. And so, like I said, he put me to sleep with stories around civil rights and really understanding how to push and engage communities around standing for injustice.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify that point. James, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. So I'm James Alberson. I'm a 24-year resident of Renton, originally born in Texas, grew up in Columbus, Ohio. My family's from Texas. My father and mother, interesting experience back then. And two things that I always take away from my mother and father is no matter what the situation that they were faced with, they did what they had to do to excel and to get to wherever they need to be. My father was a chemist at Dow Chemical out of college and realized that actually there was a better living in sales and decided to move us to Columbus, Ohio, where he was the first black salesperson, pharmaceutical salesperson in the state of Ohio. And he always used to say, you know, boy, if it is to be, it's up to me. And there was always a level of personal accountability, personal responsibility, always consequences to your decisions, and always you had to stand up and face whatever situation that you face. And I've lived my life that way. Like I say, moved out here in 1997. I got involved really majorly with the city when I joined the chamber after I bought my franchise that deals with training and consulting and leadership and coaching and sales. And ever since then, I've been a former chair of the board for the chamber, currently on the Renton Planning Commission, live in the Renton Highlands with my wife and, well, I was about to say 2 daughters, but one just went to college. She's at UW, and then my daughter who's still in the, as a junior at Hazen. And I'm running to make sure that Renton stays the great place it has always been, to make sure that as we grow, we have good growth and not the kind of growth that actually can cause more problems and send us in the wrong direction. That's me, James Alberson.
Thank you. Moving over here, we have Ben to begin with.
Thank you kindly, and thank you everybody for hosting this. This is a kind of a joy to meet everybody. First thing you need to know about me, this is not my natural habitat, me speaking about myself, and I'm much more of a deliberative person, and so speaking for us introverts, good day. I was born in Oakland, California, to my parents, obviously, and we ventured to England to chase financial security in the oil crisis of the 1970s, and bouncing around, we eventually came back to America and Issaquah and Carnation, and then eventually stayed there for a good long time. I made my way after high school to Renton, where I met what would be my girlfriend, and then eventually my wife, and started to pursue my dream of an IT support company. There was kind of an interim there. I had a business partner, and we sold video games online well before Amazon. And before you think that's really fancy, there were just games we found in thrift stores to collectors. So, I became very thankful for living in Renton. The city gave a lot to me, especially as a new family and starting out. And we started a process of trying to give back by saving the Renton City Library as a group. I had the joy to work with the city arborist with the Renton Street Trees Initiative, and eventually was placed on the Renton Airport Advisory Committee to help balance the needs of the city and the airport itself. Eventually, in our business, we had a recession, and I learned Kaizen and continuous improvement and made face shields for UW Valley. And we work for nonprofits and a local fusion startup. It's been a joy to be here, and I thank you.
Thank you. And our last candidate for the evening is Carmen.
Thank you. My name is Carmen Rivera. I use she, her pronouns. And I was born and raised in Renton, and also never thought I would be here. I had quite a disdain for politics up to many years ago, even up maybe to this current moment, to be honest. And it's not my area. I've worked in social services most of my career. I started working at Echo Glen Children's Center, which is a juvenile prison out in North Bend, where I worked with youth from all over the state, including King County and Renton. And then I worked for King County and worked for Youth Source, which was in Renton at the time, and then moved to Tukwila, working with youth who were out of school and placing them into internships and on-the-job training opportunities while they would pursue their high school diploma, their GEDs. I would hold a caseload of about 40 youth at that time, specifically in South King County, all the way from South Seattle down to Federal Way. So I'm very well aware of the lack of social services and resources available to our most marginalized and vulnerable populations. I was frustrated with not being able to do enough in direct social services. And so that is why I'm here and I am running, because I want to take the experience I have, not only being born and raised in the city, graduating from Lindbergh High School, and nobody hold that against me, and if anyone does, go Eagles, and learning what I have by also going abroad. I lived in England where I pursued my master's in forensic psychology, and currently working in this community and working for this community is the best thing I think I could do, because I love Renton very much, and my family came here. I'm a first-generation Rentonite, and they pursued the American dream, and they achieved it because Renton provided that for them. I want to make sure we're going to continue to provide that for, again, our most marginalized and vulnerable populations, uplifting everybody. And so I want to protect Renton, take care of Renton, and serve Renton through a social services lens and bring public service back to politics. So thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Now, you mentioned that you carried 40 youths at some point. Can you clarify what that unit of measure is so that people can understand?
Oh, for a caseload of 40 youth. So I had a caseload of 40 youth who were all
40 youths.
Youth.
Oh,
sorry,
sorry, I heard
I have a list. So similar to Mr. Johnson, I get a little self-conscious when I talk as well because I have this lovely little list. I had a caseload of 40 youths.
Okay,
She
I'm
said,
sorry.
She said the 2 Utes.
I thought, okay.
Yeah, and so that was 40 kids I would carry all the way from South Seattle down to Federal Way. Because we had such a lack of social services, I had carried a huge region of caseloads.
Thank you. And I understand. So we're going to switch back to now your top 3 issues that you plan to focus on if elected, and do you have any proposed solutions? We're going to start with James for this one.
Okay. So the top 3 issues for me first would be to develop a very comprehensive, I say comprehensive, all-inclusive, step-by-step program to address the homeless issue that doesn't just maintain status quo or put a Band-Aid on things, but from start to finish, identify those in need of help. It involves all the factors that have been shown to be effective, supportive housing, appropriate services, job training, basic health training, all under, in an ideal world here, what I propose is one roof. To help to do that effectively to really move the needle. Secondly, I want to make sure that, public safety, from a standpoint of public safety, we keep all the proper resources with the Renton Police Department and all those who keep us safe. And really, how do we add on to that so that we can ensure that they are doing their jobs properly? If there's accountability to be had, certainly do that, but not necessarily punish the entire crew for a few bad apples. And then thirdly, my third focus is to try to really bring back the business community in Renton, build it by design and not by default. Be very purposeful about the kind of businesses and the environment that we create, the kind of businesses that we bring in so the community can actually get exactly what they want in all areas.
Appreciate that. And Joe?
So my top 3 priorities are homelessness and affordable housing. I also want to make sure that we are focused on engaging the community around public safety. And when I talk about homelessness and affordable housing, one of the biggest focus areas for me in the homelessness is making sure that we are focused in on the problems and not the symptoms. For too long, we've been focused on the symptoms. I want to focus in on providing transitional housing, but then I also want to make sure we have the wraparound services around substance abuse and mental health services, and then get folks into job training. And I mean real job training, where it's skilled labor job training, where we have apprenticeships. One of the other things I'm really focused in on from an affordable housing perspective is transition the city to a more innovative approach to how we approach affordable housing, and that means looking at mixed income housing. Making sure that when we do mixed income housing, that we are approaching it from a perspective of providing really low-cost solutions for community members that need a low-cost solution for living, and then also the single-family homes, and then also the missing middle, which is your duplexes and fourplexes. And then finally, for me, I really want to focus in on public safety from the perspective of I think we ask our police to do too much. If there's a dog missing, we ask the police to go chase the dog. If there's a cat in the tree, we ask the police to go save the cat. We ask our police to do too much, and I really want to focus on programs that allow our police to be police.
Thank you, Joe. So what are your top 3 issues and your focus that you plan to focus on, and how do you have proposed solutions? Carmen?
Thank you. My proposed, so when I decided to run, I didn't want to just run on lip service. I did a lot of work on studying Renton to figure out where I could actually contribute. And it's through that social services is probably my #1 priority. Renton hasn't updated its community needs assessment for human services since 2014. In that time, we've seen our population grow exponentially and become much more diverse. It's changed demographically, and we need to make sure that we are investing our social services effectively to really get the biggest bang for our buck, especially since the City Council just passed to triple our our human services budget from $800,000 to about $3.4 million. That makes 2.8% of our budget now. And so we need somebody from a social services lens to contribute to how we're going to be strategic and effective so we get, again, the biggest bang for our buck. Second, I want to make sure that we are investing in Renton's workforce and workforce development. We need to utilize on-the-job training, apprenticeship opportunities, employment pipelines through our city, but also career exploration programs for our youth and young adults. We want to fund our workforce internally, incubate internally, and develop a strong workforce so we can see the return in what we're investing in. And finally, addressing the increasing cost of living. I don't want to see our taxes go up anymore. I'm a homeowner as well, and I want to make sure that we are not pushing out our long-living citizens, the people who have been here for a long time. I don't want to see Renton gentrify itself. We need to make sure we're addressing their increasing cost of living proactively. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben?
Thank you. It's not my first priority, but it's a priority that everybody has told me. It's public safety. There's a perception and or reality that things are getting dangerous, and I want to make sure that we keep our police force fully funded so they can continue the improvements they've been making in reaching out to the community and doing the things that they need to do. My second priority would be trying to switch the narrative from completely low-income housing to low-income home ownership. Home ownership is generally the breaking point or the change point for a family and generational security and safety, and it affects almost every aspect of well-being, from domestic violence to childhood education to just being secure, and even divorce rate. And I think we can do that with our partnerships with the Renton Housing Authority if we make sure that the city supports it and moves forward. And traffic and transportation, I think we've been shortchanged by some of our partners. I think we need to make sure that Sound Transit and WashDOT and everybody else does the things that they've been promising for us in order to increase our ability to get around. And if we don't have the ability to get around, then we can't have affordable home ownership. That's kind of a chicken and the egg process. The last thing, I want to work well with the council. I want to listen, I want to be reflective, I want to be collaborative, and I want to find solutions that work together.
Thank you, Ben. So now we're going to have an interactive. We're going to do our thumbs up, thumbs down. So this is a thumbs up if you agree or in favor of the statement, a thumbs down if you disagree or are not in favor, and a neutral if you have not formed an opinion. There's 21 topics. After we go through this, each of you will have 60 seconds to, it's a long night, so we got a lot to go through, 60 seconds to expand on any of your responses to the speed questions. So are you ready?
I'm sorry, so you said 60 seconds to?
After we go through the speed round, you'll have 60 seconds to make a comment on any of those topics as you see fit, okay? A cap on school impact fees on multifamily developments for school district funding. Agree, disagree, or neutral? Increase the city's B&O tax. Increase property taxes more than 1%. Add or increase a head tax. Just want you to note here, we're kind of getting a lot of the, we're having similarities here. Add or increase impact fees. Add or increase permit fees above actual city cost. Add a city income tax.
Yeah, really.
I just read these questions, ladies and gentlemen. Increase the real estate excise tax. Defunding the police. Defunding the fire. Vaccination proof or negative COVID test for restaurants, bars, and events.
Once again?
The proof of vaccination or negative COVID test for restaurants, bars, and events. Thank you. Partnership with South King County Housing and Homeless Partnership. Council ordinances prohibiting pet stores from selling puppy mill dogs.
Who's going to be for that?
One more time?
It's a council ordinance prohibiting pet
To
stores from
prohibit.
selling puppy mill dogs.
Prohibit from selling puppy milk.
Prohibit.
Prohibiting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Prohibit?
Prohibit. Like,
Prohibit,
keep-
yes.
prohibiting,
Yeah.
keeping them from selling the dogs.
Define prohibit, I'm kidding.
I used to sing now. RFA Proposition 1, a measure on the upcoming November 2nd ballot regarding the continuation of the fire benefit charge, the FBC. So the statement is, homelessness impacts our business community. Do you agree, disagree, or don't have an opinion yet? Council action on something that limits local campaign spending. Do you agree, disagree, or neutral?
Oh.
That's a tough one.
Interesting, huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
The statement, the press is an enemy of the people. The press is, okay,
The press is the enemy of the people.
Enemy of the people.
of the people, yes.
The press is the enemy of the people?
The press, that's what they wrote, that's what they gave
All
me.
right.
All right.
What does it depends? Which we're not
Do you,
gonna
I
go
know,
for it depends.
okay, next question. Do you agree, disagree, or undecided? Safe injection sites. The statement, your truth is the only truth.
No.
Okay. Taxing big business groups like Amazon. Do you agree, disagree, or haven't formed an opinion? Campaign promises are just campaign rhetoric. Do you agree, disagree, or haven't formed an opinion yet? All right, that's the end of our 21 rounds. It was painless, right?
Woo! Painless.
So now we're going to have 60 seconds for you to expand on any of your answers or responses. And we start with James.
See, I can't write with my left hand, so I couldn't write all these things down. But the one thing that, you know, the press thing sticks out in my mind, enemy of the people. I said neutral, but it's really, you know, it really depends on what's going on. I think overall, you know, the press as a job, I think, quite frankly, it's about sensationalism and how to make it as sexy as they can. I think that it's also important for the people to find their sources all over, find impartial sources, and to not necessarily believe everything they hear or they read, but to ask questions and to be very diligent on understanding exactly all sides of things and come down on a very reality-based conclusion and not something that feels good or that's emotional or that everybody is, that's popular. So to that degree.
Thank you. Thank you. Carmen.
Yes, and so there's been some awful rhetoric going around because I'm an educator. I'm actually a criminal justice professor for Seattle University. I've been there for 5 years. And after the murder of George Floyd, I saw in my area of academia nobody accurately talking about what it meant to actually defund and abolish the police. These are concepts and theories that have been happening since the 1930s. And we've had people like Angela Davis be labeled as terrorists for their very ideas. I'm an academic at heart, and so I find it very sad that people are choosing to persecute academics for what they teach and what they stand for in terms of bettering our society. I think defund the police is a very clickbaity term that's now being used by conservatives for fear-mongering politics, and that's why I chose to educate people. Now, it really does depend on the city. It depends on the jurisdiction. It depends on the social services provided in that city, the crime rates, the demographics, and I'm actually doing research, which is a 30-year longitudinal study on how we fund law enforcement in Washington State, comparing it to social services and crime rates. It's a very intensive study, and so I don't have an opinion as it overall, but for the Renton Police Department, I have no plans and no desire to defund the Renton Police Department by any means. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry? I put my thumb neutral. I'm sorry that you didn't see that.
And we're going to try to focus here. All right, Joe.
So you saw me do my thumb like this for when it came to defund the police. So every societal failure cannot be put on the police. Schools don't work, we ask the police to fix it. No mental health services investment, we ask the police to fix that. We need to make sure that we are funding the right resources in our city to make sure that we have the right folks going to the right calls. One of the greatest programs that I've seen out there is the Cahoots program that's been funded by the Eugene Police Department and by the Whitebird Clinic down in Eugene, Oregon. They came up with that program 31 years ago. Last year, they had 24,000 calls. 150 of those needed a police response. That lets you know that they have invested in the right types of services that can help their communities be safer. Because it's all intersectional when it comes to housing, when it comes to homelessness, when it comes to engaging the community in public safety, it's all intersectional.
Thank you. Ben?
A free press is absolutely necessary for a functioning society. They're annoying. They're bought by corporations. They have ridiculous advertising, but that's the baseline. Press is definitely needed. From my standpoint, it seems the topic has turned to defund the police. I disagree strongly, especially for Renton, because the amount of police per capita is actually less than what we have in Eugene. What happens in Cahoots is an addition to police as far as funding goes. Cahoots needs the cooperation of the police for difficult situations. I'm sure this topic will come up again, but our Renton police force has done an amazing job, and a baseline of making sure that an officer can get to a situation within minutes is absolutely required for anybody to feel comfortable. So I strongly disagree with defunding the police.
Thank you. So I'm going to just take my moderator's choice here. I'm going to start with Carmen. When we say defund the police, it can have, as you had mentioned as an academic, it can have many different meanings. Can you tell us how you define that statement, or what you see as the root there?
It really is more of a reallocation of funds. And the most important part is where you're putting the funds, essentially. It's like, it's not just about taking the money away, it's about where it's going. And that's always the missing piece when people are talking about, they only see the part of taking the money away. But we do see in some areas an overfunding of law enforcement and a militarization of our police, which is what we're trying to change in terms of community public safety and community policing. And so in terms of like the Cahoots program, that funding, which is additional funding, which I would actually promote additional funding for Renton Police Department if it meant bringing something like the Cahoots program, because something like that would actually provide relief to Renton police, because they are overworked, they are overwhelmed. My father was a Seattle police officer for 38 years. He had an incredible career, but he'll tell you that police became the catch-all for everything. And so they can't respond within minutes and get to those most serious calls when they are overworked and there are not enough of them. And so when you have people that can take more or less serious calls, mental health calls that police don't necessarily need to be at, like Cahoots, they relieve law enforcement, and so they are free to do more important things.
And
You're
so
welcome.
I'm going to swing back to Joe, because you had mentioned that too. And so the question is kind of on the definition of defunding. And did you want to expand on anything that was mentioned earlier?
No, just the fact that, so defund the police is definitely puts people in the tribes. And it's a purposeful statement to make people have a terrible reaction to something that really talks about how can we reimagine? How can we relook at how we spend dollars with the police department? Like I said, the Cahoots program was developed between the Eugene Police Department and the Whiteberg Clinic. It wasn't the Eugene Police Department was having a problem and the council members decided to give them the Cahoots program. They developed that program together because they knew that they had about 35% of their calls that were being put toward mental health responses and substance abuse responses. So 24,000 calls last year, 150 of those needed a police response. We have to rethink who's been sent to these calls, and we have to stop asking our police to do everything.
Thank you. Ben, did you want to expand? You touched a little bit on the defunding concept.
Joe mentioned that police officers go pick up kittens. That's actually a good thing, because we don't want our police to be going through a series of hyper-vigilant, overburdened, overtaxed, dangerous situations. The police actually do need that sort of work away from being the heroes all the time in order to have an ability to approach a situation calmly and collectively. And as soon as you shrink the police force, they have lost that ability. They're just overburdened and start making poor decisions, which is exactly what we don't want. We want our cops to be spread out evenly amongst the city to help us when needed and to be able to give us the support we need. And defunding them would also take away the training, the budget for training. It would get rid of the officers that are newly appointed, which best represent our community. That's wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. And James, although you didn't speak about that, do you want to comment here?
I'll make a quick comment. I mean, I understand semantics and names and that sort of thing, but words do matter. And when you say defund the police, even if you're saying, hey, taking away resources, reallocating resources, yeah, that's what it's all about to some degree. But if the thought is, well, you know, they're overfunded, well, I think you need, I don't think the Renton Police Department is overfunded, and I think it's not necessarily about taking away and somehow adding. You have to find a way to add. Certainly the response teams, the group response teams like Eugene or in Denver, they have a police individual, social services person, and a paramedic and that sort of thing. They have these right teams. And what out of 6,000 calls last year, it only resulted in about 4% arrests. You know, that sort of combined.
Thank you, James.
Okay.
So we're going to switch topics here, and I'm going to start with you, Carmen, just so you're aware. So what role do you believe the city plays in addressing climate impacts? Should the city consider any specific actions to help curb climate change? If yes, what would you propose? And this is another 90 seconds.
When it comes to our climate, I think that is definitely a regional issue. It's not just a Renton issue, but Renton needs to work regionally with King County to make sure that we update our clean economy strategy and we are making the right moves in terms of what we're putting our funding into. We invest in our waterways so much, but the Cedar River is at risk with the fact that there is an asphalt plant right outside of Renton that is slated to be built 150 feet away from the Cedar River. We are currently developing on our natural wetlands, which has harmful effects into our wildlife and essentially the surrounding beings that make Renton so beautiful, the greenery, the green space. And what we saw even this summer with the heat waves and the rising heat and some of our roads even buckling in terms of the heat, we need to make sure that our infrastructure can handle the growing heat wave, but we also need to make that just transition from fossil fuels to more greener moves, and we have to do it so we're not putting people out of the job. We need to be able to retrain people into these new types of ways of living and to respond to the climate crisis. We need to move away from natural gas. We can't eliminate it entirely. That's not possible, I think, in my lifetime, unfortunately. But we do need to move away from it, and we need to just make more intentional moves while training the people who are currently working with natural gas, train the people who are currently working on those areas that aren't making that green transition yet. So as we make those moves, we have to train new people and train our current employees.
Thank you. Ben, same question.
Well, you can probably guess with my involvement in the Renton Street Trees, I very much think highly of the environment. It's not only good for the ecology, it's good for us humans to be able to have green spaces and places to go. The biggest contribution we can make to climate impact and climate change is to have a very good functioning city so that people do not move to the suburbs. The energy usage of a person and a family in the suburbs is almost much, I don't want to use specific numbers, but it's much larger than somebody living in a city. From delivery of services to transportation energy use to infrastructure use to even the size of the home use. If we have a well-run city that can grow dynamically, it will help save a ridiculous amount of energy and help preserve the green spaces around us. Mandating or demanding new types of construction I think shouldn't be done directly. I think we should, if we start doing that, we start getting into micromanagement. But if we do decide that we need to curb some certain types of construction, I would much rather have it done on a sort of a generalized energy use fee rather than kind of picking and choosing winners and losers as far as energy use, like gas versus electricity versus solar. Just bake the economies of the externality into the product and let people choose.
Thank you. James, what role do you believe the city plays in addressing climate impacts? Should the city consider any specific actions to help curb climate change? If yes, what would you propose?
Well, I think the city plays a large role, I think like any city does in addressing climate impact, because there's, as you've heard a few answers, there's a lot of different ways and facets to address that. And I think you have to keep in mind, really the long game. You're not going to change things tomorrow, but what are you putting in place right now that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, it's a better it's a better situation for our kids and that sort of thing. One of the things I think is very important is how can we get as many vehicles off the street as possible, lower congestion and things like that. We have, from a transportation standpoint, How do we increase in a very responsible way mass transit options, or keep people from having to go on the road elsewhere? How do we bring jobs here where they can actually live and work in the same place? I like Ben's answer as well as far as developing maybe the inner core, so people don't need to necessarily move out to the suburbs. I think light rail, once again, the long game, light rail will be very key in helping to reduce the amount of cars on the road. And it may be a pie, I would have to keep an eye on the clock here, I figure we have a clock. A pie in the sky answer, but I wouldn't mind if the city could look into somehow maybe incentivizing electric cars, the purchase of electric vehicles by Renton residents. One way to decrease emissions from a mass standpoint.
Thank you, James. Joe?
So I think one of the biggest ways the city can impact the climate is being a leader and looking at the fleets that we have and making sure that we're transitioning those fleets that we control from gas to electric. Really starting to put ordinances in place that allow our building codes to tell developers as they come into our community that they need to be using sustainable materials to build facilities. We also need to protect our wetlands and our parks. We have to make sure from those particular avenues that as we invest in these types of things, that we are putting the history and the future, not the history, because you can't change history, that we're putting the future of our kids to the forefront. And that means making sure that we're looking at sustainable ways of building facilities, protecting our wetlands, and then also looking at our fleets and also incentivizing particularly our transportation, since we've been pretty much passed by King County in some regards, a transportation benefit district that would allow us to actually move into being able to fund some of those integrated systems to be able to expand what King County is doing. Seattle has been really successful in that way, and so I would like to do some of those things.
Okay, thank you. A number of businesses have brought forward questions surrounding the depolicing of property crimes, as well as unintended impacts of HB 1310, and their level of frustration with safety concerns, not just in the downtown core, but throughout the city. As council, what do you see as your role in strengthening public safety? What is your position on how to best support and fund public safety? And this begins with Carmen.
Thank you. So I think the mistake that we constantly make is we equate public safety. Equate. Thank you.
You're
See,
welcome.
now I'm getting self-conscious, right?
We're friends here.
Thank you. We think public safety means police, and that's it. And that's not it. Public safety can be so much more, and that's why criminal justice is made up of courts, police, and corrections. And that's why, there are diversion programs and community-based programs that can be incredibly helpful, social service programs that are being incredibly helpful. It's been seen that cities with social services and more resources actually do not need as heavy of policing, because again, those services are attacking, like Joe said, the root of the problem, not just the symptoms. We look at policing for everything, and I definitely do think that we still need police, but we overwork them. And so social services, I think, help relieve them and alleviates them. Now, to the point, I do think Renton Police Department is understaffed. I would like to hire more police officers that look like the community that they serve from this community, specifically adding points maybe to the hiring system that if you're from Renton or were raised in Renton, that adds in some way. I want to take the knowledge I have in working adjacent to criminal justice and within the criminal justice field to enhance our public safety holistically and look at holistic public safety, not just law enforcement. Law enforcement's a very important component, but it's not the entire component, and it shouldn't be.
Thank you. I'm going to just want a quick rebut here. I've talked to or heard from police officers in the past who don't necessarily want to live in the city in which they police because they don't want to run into the person they arrested in the grocery store with their family, or when they're out to dinner with their wife or their spouse. And so when you say from the community, how do you meet those potential or safety officers? What are your words of encouragement for them?
I think that's absolutely understandable, and that's a personal choice in the department that you choose to serve. I also think in terms of excessive use of force and not being using your power to the best of your abilities, it's much harder to be disrespectful to your neighbor and somebody that you live by or live in the community with you versus somebody that you're completely detached from. And so I think there is something to be said about community pride and being a part of this community.
Thank you. Joe, so do you want me to repeat the question?
Yep.
As a number of businesses have brought forward questions surrounding the depolicing of property crimes, as well as the unintended impacts of HB 1310, and their level of frustration with safety concerns, not just in the downtown core, but throughout the city. As council, what do you see as your role in strengthening public safety? What is your position on how to best support and fund public safety?
So I'm actually endorsed by two of the Black Caucus members that actually came up with HB 1333, Jesse Johnson and then also David Hackney. And as you sit down with them and talk to them about the conversations that they had with the police when they actually came up with that law, one of the biggest things around that is how do we tweak that law once it's in place? They have both said that the pendulum swung left a lot. And it was because it was an outcry from community that police had to reform. And as a black man, I know that police has to reform, right? I have a black son. And it should mean more to this community that all our community members want to be safe instead of just worrying about defunding the police. It's reform. It needs to be put in place. And HB 1333 actually helps in that regard. And like I said, when you talk to David Hackney and Jesse Johnson, they tell you there needs to be some tweaking that needs to happen to that law. Now, as far as the council member is concerned, I need to take HB 1333 and really understand it and make sure it applies to the agency that I'm responsible for, plain and simple. And to make sure that the community that these folks are policing are accountable to the community. And so those are the ways I'll approach it. But definitely that law was put in place to help swing the pendulum because there was an outcry by community members that things had to reform.
Thank you. Ben.
Thank you. So the various House bills that have gone through for police reform have been inspired by very noble goals. And I think in particular case, the more recent one has swung a little too far and kind of hampered some ability of the police to go after suspects that don't have probable cause. I think for certain crime, I think the police do need to be able to go after suspects that may not come to that standard. And I hope that some of what I perceive to be an overreach gets changed. The Renton Police Department, though, has looked at the majority of these things and said, yeah, been there, done that. Reduce the use of force, make sure things are appropriate, make sure that they have the training involved. So for our department, these things coming from the state aren't nearly as earth-shaking. Property crime has to be managed. It is not a free-for-all. I've spoken to too many small businesses that have had trouble surviving, massive amounts of shoplifting. And you can kind of see what happens in San Francisco as the years progress and criminals learn that you can get away with, property crime. People just run in, steal stuff, and run away. And, major chains are closing and small businesses are closing. But that can't be a free-for-all if we're to have, especially for small businesses, because they're a huge driver of uplift for, families and people that have trouble getting jobs. Thank you.
And James.
So I won't even mince words with this. I think that that bill, the tweaking is an understatement. And the pendulum didn't swing, they pushed it. And I think we're seeing, and there are some, I'll spare you the story, but there are some seriously detrimental effects to the limitations that it put on a police officer to respond to certain incidents. Certainly, there needs to be a distinguished aspect of when they go and who goes with them and that sort of thing. But it's one of those things where they took away expecting to add, and they should have just added and clarified. As a council person, I would lead the charge on how to figure out how we actually manage that bill so that we actually can give more, and make it sensible. I think it was one of those short-sighted, emotional decisions that did not take into consideration the long term. And that's just point blank. That comes from some conversations with police officers, from stories I've heard, and from just actually looking at it from a pragmatic standpoint. I understand things need to be done, but I don't think that was it. I'd like to see a more community-based policing program where, quite frankly, communities know the officers for the most part who are there. That builds trust, that builds credibility, and I think that builds relationships more.
Okay, thank you. You two have very divergent opinions on this, so I'm gonna allow for a rebuttal. Would you like to rebut anything?
Yeah.
He's
So, like I said, I am endorsed by David Hackney and Jesse Johnson, and Tawana Nobles, for that fact, that are part of that caucus that actually came up with HB 1333. And they have actually said they really need to tweak that law, plain and simple. And so when we are talking about, as council members, you have to go to the source of where those laws came from and actually start having conversations with those leaders. And me having been endorsed by them, I can sit down and I can sit at the table with them and like start really thinking about some common sense changes that could really affect our community. Because they believe in me and they've endorsed me, we can have those conversations much better than someone they haven't endorsed.
okay. James, I see a rebuttal coming here.
Endorsement or not, I can sit down and have a kind of conversation with somebody about the shortcomings of the bill and what needs to be done. I would hope that they don't need to like me in order to actually hear a common sense, logical, rational, critically thought, pragmatic approach to how things need to be addressed. Sure, it's great to have relationships and that sort of thing, but sometimes that stops you from asking the tough questions and, more importantly, giving the tough answers. So I can appreciate what Joe's saying. I just don't necessarily agree.
We're going to circle back to that point and move on to our next question.
Okay.
Thank you for helping me earn my pay today. As we emerge from the global pandemic, what are your strategies and recommendations to attract and retain business? How will you make this a business-friendly city? Joe, if you're ready.
So one of the biggest things that I would want to do is start cutting down on the cost of starting a small business. The permitting fees, the B&O tax that we ask folks to pay. Also, I want to make sure that businesses that are struggling during COVID-19, that we help them get to the resources, right? Because a lot of these businesses don't know how to navigate to get to those resources. And we need to make sure that everybody has equal access to the money given by the federal government and then allows that money to be distributed to these businesses. So those are the things I really want to do. The other piece of it is one of the coolest things that I've seen is Stanford University and San Francisco have come up with this amazing program where they do incubation and give grants to great ideas. And I'd like to work with the University of Washington and RTC and start to come up with a grant to where we can actually give that to local businesses for innovation, for coming up with some amazing ideas that we can grant those businesses and so that we can grow them right here in the city of Renton. So those are some of the things I'd like to focus in on as a council member.
Thank you. Ben, as we emerge from the global pandemic, what are your strategies and recommendations to attract and retain businesses? How will you make this a business-friendly city?
Thank you. I have a little bit of experience running a small business.
Tell us about that. You
It's
have 90
difficult.
seconds.
It's more difficult than it looks. Speaking from my own experience, what made it harder than it needed to be is I didn't know the resources that were there. I think the city does have a good opportunity to reach out to potential small business owners, micro businesses, I think would be almost be a better way, and tell them of the resources and tell them of the ability that they have and encourage them. We have to do that because we've lost a lot of small businesses during COVID. And a small business tends to uplift the people that we most need to reach. They tend to be people that can have trouble getting a job in other places. So they start out on their own with a hope and a dream and their family members working side by side and are a huge economic driving force for our community. And we need to encourage that. I could see a small business incubator project in Renton that could be run by a partnership with the Renton Technical College, and a great amount of outreach from the city and its partners to reach people that are just starting on that first journey. Thank you.
Thank you. James,
Yes, Carmen.
would
Can
you
read
repeat the question? Yes,
Please
not
do,
a problem.
please do.
So as we emerge from the global pandemic, what are your strategies and recommendations to attract and retain businesses? How will you make this a business-friendly city?
Okay, well, the first thing, I mean, when you think about what are you doing to incentivize businesses to actually either start in the city or relocate to the city, I think that's important, and that could be part of from the standpoint of permitting, or maybe giving some sort of a financial incentive to, at least in the first year or so, to come here. I think it's also important I like the incubator idea, certainly for small businesses. I also think that because starting a business and running a business is no easy affair, and quite frankly, most businesses are out of business in 5 years. And so the question is, what kind of system do you have in place to support those businesses in every aspect to increase that survival rate? I think a city could come up with some sort of plan to help to do that. I also think that addressing the homeless problem in a successful way. A lot of businesses are leaving Seattle because, quite frankly, it is not a good environment because of what's happened there. So I think that's linked as well. And overall, I think finding out from the community what businesses they want, and being purposeful in going out and finding those businesses, building by design versus by default. I think when you put all those things together, you can actually end up building the type of business community in the different areas that you want.
Thank you. Carmen.
Thank you. When it comes to making us more business friendly, I think there's so much the city can do that everyone here has already said that I agree with a lot of it. I also think that we can lead by example. Small businesses doesn't just mean your brick and mortar shops, right? It also means somebody who's trying to start their business from their home, somebody who's trying to start an online business. And so making sure that they are aware of those resources, making sure that the permitting process, like Joe said, is not too expensive, and that maybe even scale it for those depending on what their current socioeconomic status is, making sure that the fees, and we're lowering the barriers so people can actually grow their small businesses, but also when there's construction going on downtown, making sure that we're allocating funds for those small businesses. There were some businesses on 3rd that were closed for months because of the construction that was happening. They didn't see a dime from the city. And so I want to make sure that we rectify that we fix that, especially going forward with those small businesses, to encourage them to stay here in Renton. I think public safety definitely has a part to play. I think social services has a part to play. Everything is interconnected, but also us as leaders encouraging people to go support those small businesses. When I went downtown after Boon Boona Coffee had their sign knocked down by the construction company, the owner informed me that nobody had come and seen him for over the entire pandemic. Not a single city council member had come down and see him. And that is unacceptable to me. We need to go encourage shopping at our local small businesses by leading by example and sharing how we can do that on our own here as leaders.
Thank you. I'm going to do a quick follow-up question with a minute in the same order. So starting with you, Joe. Everyone mentioned about access, and we talked about capital and things of that nature. As a commercial banker at a small community bank here in the South King County area and working with Renton Technical College, it's not just the capital, it's the technical skills.
Yes.
So can you expand on your thoughts about how those technical skills can be, how the city can help move those things forward in
So-
just 1 minute?
Okay. So one of the examples I use is Rockwood Rising. It's a program that's actually going on right now in Grisham, Oregon, where they do provide those technical skill sets to help businesses be better. So like knowing how to pay your taxes, knowing how to build a budget, all those things are really important because a lot of businesses fail in that regard. And so when I talk about incubation, those are the things I really want to focus in on, is those technical things that businesses just don't know how to do, or you don't know how to do because you don't have any experience in it.
Thank you. Ben?
Technical skills, well, the RTC does a great job. I've hired many of their students, and they've gone on to great careers after leaving my little company. The technical skills, yeah, I could see myself needing them desperately when I first started up a business, and having an incubator that would walk me through the steps and the things I didn't know that I didn't know. The first B&O tax bill was a surprise, and things like that.
Not a good surprise, I presume.
No. Other than that, I think we need to reiterate where we need to do, and which is encourage these micro businesses to start their first step. There's one thing I would like to maybe open up, when you have a business license and you work from your home, I would like to open it up a little bit so that you can have more than one worker with the permission of your neighbors. I think that would allow a business to get a little bit of a leg up before they need commercial space.
Thank you. James?
I think sometimes, when you say technical skills, that may throw some people because they start thinking, technical, technology and that sort of thing. I'd rather say, how do we teach entrepreneurship, running a business 101? Because we're talking about financial literacy and
If you want to finance, RTC will offer the course.
there you go. But how can the city get involved? I mean, if you want to increase the attractiveness of starting a business in the city, then if you have kind of this safety net that right off the bat, they're going to help me get started. I don't have to stumble, bumble, and rumble through getting this thing to survive, because it's easy to start a business.
Well, you do want to rumble.
It's easy to start a business,
No touching,
but
no
to keep it going, that's the problem.
Yes.
And so, really, I'd like to see a pitfalls of running a business 101 that would stop that that failure.
Well,
if you
wow,
will.
that's Pitfalls 101, a new course being offered. Carmen,
real.
technical assistance?
So actually, I had a technical assistant work group meeting today. I sit on the Liquor and Cannabis, Washington State's Liquor and Cannabis Control Board's Social Equity and Cannabis work group, and we have a technical assistant work group focusing on how do we help those small businesses that are winding into the cannabis industry, especially an industry that has not represented the people that it has disproportionately impacted, unfortunately. And so it's looking at how we can fund technical assistance, working with RTC, but also working with local nonprofits. Renton is the home to Anew, which is a nonprofit located downtown right by Walmart on 7th that helps people get to pre-apprenticeship programs. It has been here since the 80s and it's highly underutilized. It's one of Renton's best kept secrets. So let's make those partnerships. Let's work with RTC. Let's incentivize, but also let's put our money where our mouth is and fund technical assistant grants for small businesses so they can be successful.
Thank you. Well, that is our halfway mark. We are going to take a 5-minute break, let everyone catch their breath, and we will be back in 5 minutes. Welcome back. Welcome back, everyone, to the second half of our City Council, Renton City Council forum here. As everyone joins their seats, we're going to start our next session of questions. So, the City of Renton is estimated to receive approximately $18 million from the American Rescue Plan Act in one-time funding. What are your priorities of the utilization of that funding? And please be as specific as possible. We start with Joe.
So for me, one of the ways that we need to prioritize that funding, number one, is our small businesses that were really impacted by COVID-19. We need to make sure they get some of those funds so they can be viable. Number two, making sure that we are spending dollars to make sure folks are getting the vaccine, because the only way out of this is to get vaccinated. And then three, making sure from a city perspective that we're investing in programs that allow navigation of these systems. So, and what I mean navigation, if you can't pay your rent, how do I get resources so I can pay my rent? And having a navigator that can walk people through the process. So those are the types of things I think we need to invest in with those dollars.
So you're referring, just for clarification, are you referring to funding of the staffing position that helps people
Yes.
navigate? Thank
Yes,
you.
yes.
Thank you. James, what are your priorities of the utilization of these funds? And please be specific.
Okay. Certainly, in the way of grants supporting businesses that may still be reeling from the effects of COVID, carve out some for that. I think we've talked about as far as creating these additional teams or adding resources to the law enforcement to add behavioral health, individual social service people. And I think certainly some funds will go there. I think some funds will certainly need to be put towards the supportive housing aspect for the homeless. If we're going to be serious about actually having a comprehensive plan, then we need to have all aspects, all pistons firing on that. And so I think a good amount of money there is important if we're serious. I mean, there's a lot of places we can spend the money, but as far as I'm concerned, those are the main priorities. And also, as I mentioned, can we set aside some funds to incentivize businesses to come there, to come here, maybe to waive certain taxes if we have a surplus here and there for the first year or something like that? How do we create this environment, since we might have this extra money, to get some of the right businesses into the city?
So just quickly, some of your recommendations, these are one-time funds, but you're talking about things that are ongoing, such as supportive housing.
Yes, well, you have to start somewhere. It's not the end-all, be-all solution, but if we wait until everything's in place and ready and we're ready to go, we can get ready all we want.
Okay,
But at some point, you have to pull the trigger and get started.
thank you. Just wanted to clarify. And Ben,
It's a fascinating question, because I think you have several values. You want to help business, you want to help large business even to keep employees, you want to help homeowners, and you want to help workers. And I think for me, I would look at mirroring something almost like the PPP loan, which helps small business, helps big business, helps the workers, and helps families all at the same time, as the money kind of comes down and through and winds up in the individual workers' hands eventually. I think we're headed for a little bit of a business cycle here, and I think it would be nice to make sure that our businesses are prepared for that as much as possible, and have a healthy start to, if COVID recovery isn't as nice as we'd like it to be. I think that's all I need to say.
okay, thank you. Carmen,
So the city of Renton manages a $500 million budget. So 18 million is not as much as we think it is. It is a lot of money for the average person, of course, but it's not as much, and we're going to go through that, I think, pretty quickly. For me, I would love to see us put some of that funding into social services. Like I know I sound like a broken record, but that's my background, that's my bias, that's where I come from. So social services, but also community, parks, recreation, and also we study here in the Carco Theater, our arts is incredibly important, and I think we can afford that. There is art small businesses, right? There is business in the arts. And so investing in that and prospering that, small business grants, workforce development grants to help foster and our workforce and our small businesses here in Renton, but also possibly more public housing. And I think that would be a really great move for the city of Renton. So those are my top priorities, but again, it's not a decision I get to make by myself. I would have to work with the entire city council and the community. I would want to outreach to the community and host town halls to learn what the community and where the community wants this money to go. Yes, your city leaders make the decision, but we should be willing to work to engage you to learn what you want. And that's what we're doing. I've knocked on over 4,000 doors at this point, learning from residents in Renton. And I can say I know what I know, and I don't know what I don't know. And I want to learn what I don't know. So thank you.
It's good to hear about your knower on this panel today. You're doing great. So homelessness is not just an issue regionally, it's an issue locally that impacts business. What would you do differently, if anything, to address the housing crisis, including homelessness, than the approach the current council and administration has taken? Start with Ben.
My values on homelessness are basically compassion for not only the homeless themselves, compassion for businesses, compassion for families, and compassion for the community. And as a city, we need to make sure that we foster the collaboration of partners that do a great job in building up homeless people so they can move on. We have a Compass Housing Alliance, which has graduated hundreds of people and done such a great job that some of them have gone directly from their program to actual home ownership. But we have partners that need very careful management and or correction, who treat the homeless as well as they can, but often fall flat in helping them. And when they do run into the problem, their answer is to take that person and take their possessions and push them out the door. That is unacceptable for our city. It's unacceptable for the person that happens to. It's unacceptable for the community. And I think the city made the very wise decision to hold King County responsible for the poor treatment of not only the homeless, but ourselves. But we should be willing also to let the county improve themselves. With much hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Carmen?
I'm going to out myself. I'm 32 years old. I've seen the homeless crisis get really bad just in my lifetime. I've seen city leaders all over the region pass the buck from one city to the next, and it's only lasted about as far as their political career. And I've seen it get incredibly bad in the last 10 years because I don't think we've handled it proactively. And I think it's requiring wraparound services. And what I mean by wraparound services, provided by King County and Renton, because as somebody who worked for King County, many of you may or may not have voted for the Best Starts for Kids levy, right? And that levy comes out of your property taxes. But what I can tell you that in King County, they have a map of King County where they allocate those funds. And there's a huge disparity in South King County. That's why my region that I covered when I worked for them was all the way from South Seattle to Federal Way. And so getting them to provide more social services down here is the biggest priority. Wraparound services including mental health practitioners, chemical dependency practitioners, but also workforce development. I did workforce development with youth and young adults up to the age of 25 who were homeless, who were out of school, who were incarcerated. And when you get them and invest in them and get them interviews and help them develop their resume and teach them how to interview and develop those soft skills and get them into those on-the-job training opportunities, you see success. You see them actually pull themselves out of homelessness. I have seen that. It is possible. And so that is the direction I really want to go at it very proactively. Thank you.
Thank you. James?
So quite honestly, we need to learn to be copycats. We're not necessarily looking to recreate the wheel. There are cities in the country that have actually made a better dent in the homeless issue than we have. I mean, Seattle, the Seattle area, in 2020, homelessness grew by 42%. San Diego, approximately 2%. When you live over the previous 4 years. So, what's the difference? Hey, the weather, certainly in San Diego, arguably is better than Seattle. So what's going on? And so it's a matter of, one of the things I'd want to do is actually find out, and whether I copy or cherry pick or encourage the council, encourage the city to find out what's working and actually put it into place. Like Carmen says, I mean, it's supportive housing, appropriate staffing. It's on-demand services. It's regularly scheduled services, mental health, drug rehab, behavioral health, just basic health services, job training, educational services, child care, job placement services. All those things are a part of actually being serious about matriculating someone from the street back into society. But we don't have to figure it all out ourselves. We just have to open our eyes and look and actually say, that's a good idea, we're gonna do that, and actually have the, oh, one last thing, you gotta have structure, enforcement, a discipline program.
Thank you. Joe?
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Homelessness is not just an issue regionally, it is an issue locally that impacts business. What would you do differently, if anything, to address the housing crisis, including homelessness, than the approach the current council and administration are doing or has taken?
So one of the big things I'd like to do is get back into the regional consortium and take that less than 1% sales tax and give it back to King County, because it's a regional program. It's a regional issue that we need to take up as a region and not as Renton ourselves. We also need to build more capacity for shelters and transitional housing, because we know one thing about the homelessness problem is that when we have community members experiencing homelessness, we have to have transitional housing to permanent, and then also talk about those wraparound services that make people successful. So mental health and substance abuse services, right? But we have to do that regionally. Seattle has a $5 billion budget. Are they taking care of homelessness by themselves? Clearly not. And so we have to make sure as a region that we're looking at it from a regional perspective so that we can come up with some common sense solutions across all the 39 cities in King County, because we can come up with some really good solutions to the problem. One of the biggest things, and you've heard Carmen talk about it, is job training. Apprenticeships and skilled labor are key in fighting this problem that folks have around having a livable wage and being able to have a family that can thrive. And so those are the types of things that we really need to invest in as council members from a budgeting perspective to make sure that we are successful in solving the problem and not just going after symptoms.
Thank you. So a follow-up question here. James, you mentioned San Diego went down, Seattle went up. As Carmen was mentioning, they've been moving the can around. People tend to go where services are. So in that vein, when we're looking at one city going up versus down and maybe recreating, I think you said repeating, what do you think San Diego did that we could do, or that maybe Seattle's not doing?
Well, they had a stronger supportive housing structure as far as, you know, sometimes you have to face it. It may be semi-permanent, it may be permanent, it may be transitional. When you talk about chronically homeless, it's not a quick fix in all cases. So I know they had that. They also, one of the key things they actually had enforcement and boundaries and structure. It's not just about, hey, it's over here, but oh, well, if you want to go and live in your tent, that's fine. They actually had more enforcement so that it kind of got people in where they needed to be to get the services that they needed. And when you look at any documentary that shows somebody on the other side who made it through, they say, I'm so glad, and whatever words they use, that they made me do it, that they put me in it, that they did whatever. Arguably, they may not be in the best decision-making capacity, depending on what their issue is. And so they actually had more of a more structured, enforced program with boundaries that actually got them in, got them moving through. And that's one of those, a couple of things that I can recall.
I was going to do a rebuttal question, since we all referenced Carmen's comments, if she had anything to add to that.
Well,
One thing I think about San Diego, just because background, I think the median income for someone who lives in San Diego is much higher for the median income who lives in the city of Renton. So then you're looking at the budget that San Diego has versus the city of Renton. And I think they may be comparable and they may not be, just because there's so many variables to take into consideration. And an excellent point. I think that we definitely need to have structure in terms of the services that we are providing, right? I think that's something that James has mentioned, and that is where, I've been labeled as incredibly progressive and liberal, but this is actually something where me and James agree, is where we do need to have those boundaries. We need to have restrictions in order to utilize the services. I'm not saying create barriers, but have healthy boundaries, right? If you are going to raising a child, you wouldn't just let them do whatever, whenever, right? When you're helping somebody else out of addiction, you can't just let them go do whatever, whenever. There needs to be those healthy boundaries. And as someone who's worked in social services and has done case management, they're hard to establish healthy boundaries. It's definitely difficult because you want to lead with compassion, and I think compassion is the most important thing for us to have. And we need to maintain those boundaries because tough love is also really important. So I don't really have much else to add to that, but yes, I just think we do need to be proactive. But I think the San Diego comparison, I would think there's a lot of variables there.
Okay, thank you. Joe, I'm going to give you opportunity on that rebuttal.
So I met the mayor of San Diego, Todd Gloria, at a National League of Cities conference, and they did a whole lot of stuff that we aren't doing here in Renton. Number one, they increased the number of employees that they had in their human services department, which then allowed them to actually go out and create relationships with the community members that are experiencing homelessness. So literally, on a daily basis, they were having one-on-one contact with known encampments and saying, hey, the city has some services that we have available. And what he said was, as they put those folks out there and actually form these relationships, the homeless community really started to say, like, well, they're coming out here every day to talk to me. Maybe they are trying to offer me something that can make me successful. So there's a whole lot of things. Another thing that they did is one of the human services programs that they implemented was a feeding service that literally they would actually go out to these encampments and provide food. And that was another way of just forming a relationship to make sure they understood that the city was there to make sure they were successful. And then there was also an accountability piece of where once they were able to get them into services, there's the accountability of having those services, but they just didn't throw them out if they broke the rules one time.
Thank you. Ben, I'm going to let you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Final rebuttal.
So everything I've heard here is amazing, right? Combined with compassion, with dignity and the care for everything. Being a small business owner, though, and watching the city budget, there's a part of me that goes, how do we pay for it? And I do not want to overpromise and underdeliver. We have very limited taxation authority because of I-960. We can't really raise property taxes. We don't have much authority over sales tax. It's getting to the point where sales tax is almost is regressive. It's hurting the poor. We have limited capacity of raising our own budget, and that's why partnerships have to be the key to this. It would be nice if we could have our own staff and our own resources and our own housing, but the budget is as constrained as it is, and our partners can actually leverage their ability to get funding where the city itself can't. It is absolutely imperative that we manage those partnerships, foster the good partnerships, and I think in this particular case, I'm very thankful that the city did not give the county the extra funding. The county would just waste it. We've seen this before, where the city was able to have a housing first priority, and this is especially appropriate when COVID is, as people recover from COVID, they may be starting to lose their homes. So I thank the city for taking bold action.
Thank you. Joe, I start with you on this question. What role does the city fill to promote workforce development? What role does the city fill to promote workforce?
So one of the things that we as a city can do is actually put community workforce agreements in place. And that's a big piece of making sure that we take apprenticeships and make sure they're the majority of the work that gets performed when we're doing like major infrastructure projects. So one of the huge roles, just like in Seattle, they put a community workforce agreement in place where it actually prioritizes certain apprenticeships that then move into skilled labor roles with the city facilities. And so that's one of the huge areas. The other piece is that cities can also invest in CTE programs with the local high schools to make sure that we're getting kids into pre-apprenticeships. And pre-apprenticeships are amazing things where you actually get a kid where they are focused in on skilled labor, and then they can get a job. And actually, if they don't want to go into debt, they can actually pay for their own college, because once you move into a journeyman type role, you can, in some of these jobs, you can make up to $55 an hour as a journeyman. And so giving kids different aspects of where they can actually get into these programs is one of the keys as well. And so that's where I think city councils can really be effective in that regard.
Thank you. James?
You know what? I would ditto everything Joe said. I'm big on apprenticeships, and also how do we actually go to the high school level to teach them the to prepare them, the soft skills, the work skills, do we work with do we try to work with them to develop programs that actually get them on a path? Not everybody wants to go to college, is set to go to college and that sort of thing. So how are we preparing them and that to get into the workforce? The city can actually develop, I think, just some standalone workforce development programs or some additional ones and that sort of thing. I mean, I don't think it's really a complicated issue, as opposed to just figuring out what's the end goal, get some numbers down, how do we best get there, and put it into place. You talk about some of that money that from some of the ARP funds, maybe that's where some of it goes to get that going. But overall, I think apprenticeships and working with the students to get them started, but also actually even those folks that are transitioning out of whatever jobs there are. Maybe they were affected by COVID. You know, put it in place, recruit, and get them going in the right direction.
So do I hear you want the Stumbles of Business 101 to be at the high school level too?
I actually believe it should be.
Yeah,
I think they should be teaching entrepreneurship.
Entrepreneurship, yes. Ben?
Fascinating question. Again, partnerships. We could work with the Renton School District to foster something along the lines of we've seen Aviation High or the Maritime High School that's opening up for Port of Seattle, feeding into the Port of Seattle. If we could come up with a sort of high school that's basically maybe around technology or the aerospace industry or even manufacturing industry that we have here in Renton. As a feeder for the industries that are here, and then working with Renton Technical College to continue their amazing work, and as a feeder program for businesses around here. I don't want to keep coming back to small businesses, but it's disturbing how many people get their start in a small business. And if the city fosters a very vibrant economy, it'll absorb so many new workers and help them develop the skills they need to continue on an upward journey on their career and to be able to support their families. So part of that is making sure we have a vibrant economic activity in the city, attracting and fostering and maintaining those businesses that do naturally their own workforce development.
Thank you. Carmen?
When I worked for King County, I was funded through the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. That is a federal funding that helps youth and young adults who qualify to get on-the-job training opportunities. We could bring that over here to Renton, and it funds internships. It funds on-the-job training for our youth and young adults, people who are the most marginalized and vulnerable who need these experiences. I also think the city of Renton can foster career exploration for our youth and young adults. Summer internship programs through the various departments in the city, public works, recreation, even in the city and staffing. We can provide them with the mentorship in our own city straight from the high school level. We also can do an employment pipeline in our city. Not every job in the city requires a college degree. So what about fostering an employment pipeline for local hires to help get those people the jobs they deserve, jobs that we can train them on the job training opportunities, like I've been saying. And also, like everyone has said, apprenticeship utilization. I echo what Joe says. We need Renton to adopt community workforce agreements. They have not done that. They need to adopt community workforce agreements. Set standards for hiring local, but also for apprenticeship utilization, because then you are actually seeing the full return of everything that you're investing into your city coming back into your city. But also, apprenticeships, they need those hours, those license hours to get their licenses, right? And if we are able to provide those opportunities with our own infrastructure, our own projects, and our own city, we can become the apprenticeship capital of Washington, which is what I want to see happen.
Thank you. Quick follow-up with Joe. You had mentioned the apprenticeships and things of that nature. One thing I heard previously in prior election cycles was that to get an apprenticeship as a plumber or in the trades, for example, you had to be at least 18. So starting with students in high school, there was a gap there. What are your thoughts about overcoming that gap?
So pre-apprenticeship programs start at 16. And a 16-year-old can get to a pre-apprenticeship program, actually start the process of transition into an apprenticeship program, and then enter into a journeyman type job after he finishes the apprenticeship program. And they're amazing. Carmen and I are endorsed by MLK Labor. And in MLK Labor, they actually talk about some of the big things that we can do through these pre-apprenticeship programs to get kids starting to understand that these amazing jobs are available. And so those are some of the key things that we want to put in place to make sure that our younger kids can really start to learn about these programs.
Thank you for clarifying. So moving on to the next question. With the loss of $320 million of public transportation funding for South King County, what is your current plan to assure we have adequate transportation for our business community? What will you do to assure Renton has a voice to receive funding for mass transit? And Joe, we start with you.
One of the things that have been super successful is transportation benefit districts. And transportation benefit districts don't have to be new taxes. Transportation benefit districts actually can come from dollars that are already available. And I think taking a percentage of our B&O tax and actually using that to augment the King County transportation would be key in providing some really transportation options for the city of Renton. So that's one of the biggest things I want to focus in on, transportation benefit districts. I mean, you can ride the light rail right now to Seattle, to the International District, get off the light link, and get on the Jackson Street trolley. The Jackson Street trolley is there because of transportation benefit districts. And so those are the things that we can do to be successful from a transportation perspective.
Thank you. James.
I'm going to keep it simple, really. Show up and speak up. You know, when it comes to how Renton has maybe gotten the short end of the stick when it comes to some of the sound transit initiatives and that sort of thing. You know, you sometimes it's the loudest voice at the table that gets action. You have to show up and you have to be resolute that you're going to get your fair share of, if you're going to pay for it, if you're putting some money in, then you need to get something out. And, you know, sometimes it's about standing up and making sure that you're the one at the end of the day that gets their fair share of what they need. I mean, I know that's simplistic, and you can do transportation benefit deals and that sort of thing, but overall, you know, put the plan together. What do we need? Where are we going? And be resolute in what we'll settle for and what we won't. Sometimes it's about playing a bit of hardball, if need be, in order to get what we need for our citizens, for our community. Once again, I mean, I'm big on eventually the light rail coming through Renton. We have the new transit center coming out at Grady and Rainier. You know, how are we keeping control of exactly what that looks like, the bus rapid transit routes, and not being bullied and not being having the wool pulled over our eyes, but making sure that we show up at the table and we speak up for what we need.
Thank you. Carmen.
I remember when we missed out on the light rail. I believe City of Renton actually fought against that light rail, and it was the biggest mistake that they've ever made. We need that light rail, and we need to make sure that we try to get back in line for that, because Renton, as the 4th largest city in King County, the 9th largest city in Washington State, not having a light rail stop is pretty ridiculous to me. Also, we need to I support the re-regionalization of transit funds because we did miss out. We don't get our bang for our buck, but we also have to work with Metro and Puget Sound Metro and King County Metro, right? And as someone who just got endorsed by the Metro Drivers Union, I just spoke with them. And we need to ask for what we want, and we need to work with them for what we want. And our citizens need more east to west transportation. That's something I'm hearing a lot of, but also between our neighborhoods. It's very difficult. I live up in the Tiffany Park neighborhood. There is one bus that does not come often enough to get you out of there. And so we need to work with King County Metro, Puget Sound, and make sure that we get what we are paying for, but also get more. Because for the density of our city, we need more. And so we need to advocate really strongly for that. But also, public transportation isn't just buses. We also need to look at our bike lanes. We also need to look at our roadways. And I really like the idea of incentivizing those who will buy electric cars and providing more charging stations as well, because that's another way to help foster green transportation and healthy transportation. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ben?
For the business community, transportation it can't happen sooner, and for our employees. So that I would favor a two-pronged approach to try to get us over this hurdle. The first one would be to work with some of the other South Sound cities to gently see if we could force Sound Transit's hand in serving us as they have promised with bus rapid transit, that they're delaying and delaying. There's been some court cases back east where a funding district that has left an area underserved has been told by the court that they actually need to serve as mostly equal as possible. They can't just keep putting light rail into places like Woodinville and Issaquah and leaving us paying the bill. The second one would be something similar to could be something similar to what Joe was recommending, getting people off of Benson and the other areas of far areas pointed towards the station in Tukwila. So leveraging the station that Sound Transit has already built for the benefit of Renton as much as possible. We can explore partnerships with Metro, partnerships possibly even with Sound Transit, to get that station fed by Renton citizens back and forth, and to hopefully at least get Sound Transit to fulfill the promises for the bus rapid transit to get us up 405. That can't happen soon enough.
So Ben, you said gently, forcibly ask. I like a little clarification. I've raised children. I don't know how to gently, forcibly do that.
It's called a velvet hammer.
I've had, you probably heard, I have a little experience with trying to get the library system to get us the service that we needed. That involved initiatives, a little bit of communication, quite a bit of communication. It involved the citizen action. It involved, but doing it politely, gently, kindly. But letting our needs known. The King County was basically proposing to underserve us, just like Sound Transit is underserving us. And I don't think we have to be rude or abrasive, but we do need to let them know that this is unacceptable and provide them a path forward to give us the service that we require. And it does require compromise. It does require understanding that we may not be immediately served, but have a path forward and do it constructively.
Thank you, Ben. As one member of a 7-member team, how do you intend to facilitate disagreements on issues you may have with your fellow council members? Ironically, we start with you, Ben, gently but forcibly.
If I'm having a disagreement with a council member, it's because I haven't listened, and it's because I maybe allowing myself to get a little bit ahead of myself. It's very important, if I was a newcomer to the council, to listen attentively, carefully, deliberatively, contemplatively, and work to find a solution where we can meet in the middle, or offer a solution that makes the problem melt away if possible. I think coming in with my ideas and trying to project my will upon the council is exactly the wrong answer. It needs to be a deliberative process where we listen to the values and the needs of individual council members and try to find a path that validates all of those different viewpoints. It'd be my honor to do something along those lines. I have to do it in my business. I'm the furthest away from the problems, so I have to listen to my employees. I have to listen to my customers. I have to listen to our partners, and gently and very carefully figure out a path forward through these things. And I've seen some decisions that I wish I would have been part of, because I think there's been some times where I think people have butted heads, and I would have liked to have the opportunity to say, hey, maybe there's a middle path here that we can work together.
Thank you. Carmen?
Renton has historically had a very cohesive Renton City Council, and I think that is because they have really good working relationships. And so as someone who I think is more coming, though I was born and raised in Renton, from the outside, I'm not someone who serves or was selected to serve on a commission or committee, because you have to be appointed by the mayor to serve on those city commission and committees. And even though I've done work in this region, I see things that I don't think some of our current city leaders do, because nobody on city council comes from a direct social service background. And so I see the blind spots. And I think civil discourse is necessary for progress. It's called growing pains. And you can absolutely be respectful. You can have conversations. It's about building relationships and building trust, and coming and approaching each other with an open mind. I absolutely think active listening is an important part of that, and also being open-minded, because I know what I know, but I don't know what I don't know. And I come from a queer, biracial woman experience who's done social service work, who's worked in criminal justice, whose father was a police officer, whose mother was a small business owner, who's born and raised in Renton. I have blind spots. And so I think a city council should be incredibly diverse. It should have civil discourse, respectful civil discourse, so they can check each other's blind spots, our confirmation biases, and our heuristics, to make sure that we are checking each other and really properly serving everybody in this community the way that we should. We shouldn't just be listening to our own echo chambers. We need to be listening to the community.
Thank you. Just to clarify a point, you mentioned that you had not served on a commission because it's by appointment. Have you applied and not been appointed? Or were you
I have
just
not.
saying you haven't?
No, I have not had the ability to apply, because I've worked pretty much 3 jobs for the last 4 years up to the pandemic. 1 full-time job and 2 part-time jobs in addition to volunteer work. And so no, I have not.
I didn't want the perception that you'd been overlooked.
Oh,
or-
no,
so
no,
just a
not by
clarifying
any
point.
means. It was just not an opportunity that I pursued, but I do absolutely wish I had.
Okay, thank you. So as one member of a 7-member team, how do you intend to facilitate disagreements on issues you may have with your fellow council members? James?
So one of my favorite quotes is by Mark Twain. He says, it's not what I don't know that'll get me in trouble. It's what I know for sure that just ain't so. And when you have disagreements with colleagues or friends or whatever the case may be, if you aren't willing to ask questions, if you aren't willing to listen, if you're looking at it as a zero-sum game, either I win or you win, then you're not going to get anywhere. So ultimately, when you're a member of a 7-member team, you have to be able to do a few things. Like Carmen said, you have to be able to actively listen. You have to be able to clarify. You can't go in with assumptions, and you can't go in with this position that I'm not budging. One of the things I do in my business, I teach my clients how to ask smart questions. Sometimes it's about helping someone realize through questioning that maybe they may be off the point, off point a little bit, or maybe through the answers that you get, you realize that you didn't know what you thought you knew. And so it's all about negotiating. It's all about finding the middle ground. It's all about uncovering the truth and making sure that you get all the facts. And quite frankly, sometimes it comes down to the point where you just have to agree to disagree and then go from there.
Thank you. Joe?
So for me, I've been a senior leader in corporate America. I've been an executive in public service, being the CIO of the city of Tukwila and being a deputy chief technology officer for King County. I cannot do my job without building relationships, and that's key in any way I approach the work. One of the big things for me is I actually come into city council being endorsed by the majority of the council, So right from day one, I come in with a backing, with a platform, with folks that know my platform that actually want to move it forward. And so those are some of the key things. But definitely, like Carmen said, it was a master class in talking about how you build relationships. And one of those things is active listening and making sure that you're listening to understand, not listening to just not listening and then just trying to get your point across. So those are some of the key things that, for me, when you're working with someone that's on a different wavelength than you are, how can you come to a balance to where we can actually move something forward and work for our community? Because that's what we're ultimately here for. We're not here to bring our ideas and take over council. It's about bringing our ideas and working with council to see if we can do some amazing things for our community.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very well said. So we're going to get into some rapid answers. We're back to that. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to respond, but these are some get-to-know-you questions. Yep. And so to make this swift, because there's about 7 questions, so we're going to kind of, Carmen, you're going to be 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the next question, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you see the circle we're doing here? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to rapid fire with 30 seconds. Huh?
Nothing.
Are you
It's
with
fine.
me?
No, we're cool.
Okay. This is when my parenting comes into play, right? So what neighborhood do you live in and why?
Oh, I live in the Tiffany Park neighborhood, and why I live in the Tiffany Park neighborhood is my father came from Puerto Rico by way of New York. He joined the Navy, joined the Seattle Police Department, and he bought a little plot of land in Renton when it was nothing, just a little quarter acre, and he paid for it to be developed, and he paid for it all the way in our family, raised our family there, and my parents have thankfully, they retired and moved to Arizona. I miss them from a distance, but I live in that home now, and it's an incredible gift.
Thank you. See, that was easy, right?
Yeah, it's fine.
So Ben, what neighborhood do you live in and why?
I live in the downtown area because I love the walkability. I love the small businesses there. I'm blessed with a great school, Renton schools for our children there. I intentionally live in the core of the city just because I love the people, which is weird for an introvert, but there it is.
Introverts, we're cool people when we get out in public. We're going to start with Joe.
So I live in the Benson Hill area, and the reason why I lived there is because we were looking for a house there forever. And we had some friends call us while we were visiting back home in Alabama and told us there was a house available and that they had discounted it significantly. And we jumped on the internet and bought it from the internet. And we love our community, love Renton. When I moved here 20 years ago, I made the city of Renton my home. And so then we were able to buy a house, and we were fortunate to be living in Benson Hill.
Thank you. James.
So I live in the Laurelhurst neighborhood in the Renton Highlands, and I've lived there all 24 years that I've been here. I ended up there, quite frankly. I came out, and Realtor took me around to different cities, different places, and I just happened to find a development that was being built, and I liked the area. I've stayed there because I like what's happened to it. I used to travel a lot, so it was easy to get to the eastern side, and plus I love being so close to Dufers, and I'll leave it at that.
We have a lot of plugs. I hope everyone's checking that. Next question, starting with you, Ben. What are your favorite places to spend time in town? Where are your favorite places to spend time in town?
I love bringing people to Boon Boona. It's a joy. It's a unique landmark. I love bringing people to the library and sharing that with people. It's one of the very few structures that are like that. Well, you obviously know I love the library.
You're an introvert. That makes a lot of sense.
The Nishikawa Lane Walk is an underused area of Renton. It's very peaceful, and it takes you to the edge of the lake where you can look on the water. And generally just cool on as well.
Thank you. Joe.
The Cedar River Trail, and then also Coulon Park. And definitely from the Cedar River Trail perspective, because my wife and I will go run the Cedar River Trail. Mm-hmm. And I just love, since I was at Boeing for 16 years, to run past the airplanes and look and see the different ones that are being built. So just love those two areas.
You lost me at run, but that's okay. James,
The question was one of my favorite places.
where are your favorite places to spend time in town?
Well, I mentioned Doofers and Melrose Grill as well when I'm actually eating. But actually, I'm with Joe. Cedar River Trail in the summertime, ride the bike kind of all the way down to Maple Valley.
There you go, now riding a bike.
Yeah, I figured that would get you. And then Coulon Park as well, just for all that it offers in whatever fashion that you want. It's a great place to be.
Thank you. Joe, what organizations or groups in the Renton community have you been involved in?
So Renton Residents for Change.
Do I get to answer the question?
Oh, I'm sorry, Carmen.
No, you're
I
fine.
sure did.
I don't want to interrupt
Actually,
Joe.
wasn't it supposed to go to Ben?
No, but
I did mine, and
No, because it's
we
going to go.
have lost control now. I did so well for 90
No, you're
minutes.
good. No, we can get this back.
No.
We're
So
good.
what are your favorite, because now we're eating, because we went to Coulon Park and we're eating, and so where are your favorite places?
Okay, so I'm a golfer. I'm a
Okay.
big fan of Maplewood. I love the golf course. I love golfing. It's where I do find my serenity. I've been golfing since I was 7 years old, and my dad got me into it before I knew any better. So now it's a love-hate relationship with that sport. But there, I love walking around downtown. I absolutely love walking around downtown, and I'm a little bit younger, but the Renton Library growing up for me was also a big thing. I spent a lot of time in libraries because I was an avid reader. It was before a lot of the internet, and so yeah.
Thank you. I gave you a little extra there for my oversight. So we're with Joe. Third question. What organizations or groups in the Renton community have you been involved in?
So Renton Residents for Change, the Renton King County Alliance for Social Justice, the Renton Anti-Racist Coalition, Credible Messengers, and then I also worked with an organization that's in this region called iUrban Teen that gets students involved in STEM programs so that we can actually help them navigate how to get into STEM roles. And so those are some of the groups.
Yeah, thank you. James.
Okay. The Renton Chamber of Commerce, where I was chair of the board for 6 years there and just been a member for 11 years. The Renton Planning Commission. Hazen Booster, actually, I was for a couple of years, the announcer for their drill team competition. That was fun. And I kind of blanked out. We'll leave it at that. There's one more, but I can't think of it.
Okay. Because
Forgive
we're
me.
stuck back at Melrose, that's why.
I'm
We're stuck
getting
over there.
hungry, yeah.
Carmen, what organizations or groups in the Renton community have you been involved in?
So as someone who did social services, the Renton Area Youth Services, RAISE, is something that I think is a huge gem that I absolutely love to work with. They're incredible. They're also in the downtown area. RAISE is amazing. I've also worked for the Renton Residents for Change with Joe and the Renton Anti-Racism Coalition. And I've also worked with Credible Messengers when I was a case manager in the 180 program. I'm familiar, and I haven't worked with ANEW, but ANEW is an incredible program that, again, y'all need to check it out. It's in downtown. It's amazing.
Thank you. Ben?
As far as giving back to the community, the Renton Airport Advisory Committee has taken a lot of my research. We've averted a lot of disasters there. Serving on that board is 4 years of boredom followed by 15 minutes of terror as you try to make sure we don't have too many business jets as FAA doesn't make us overextend the runway. It does involve research and time. School, PTA, and all of the nonprofits are a lot of joy around here.
Thank you. Starting with James, what is the city not currently doing that you want to see happen? 30 seconds.
Well, we've talked about a lot of, what it's not currently doing that I see is really being more deliberate about identifying the kind of businesses that we want here. I mean, not putting it down or anything like that, but I think, to build it back up, to really get downtown where it needs to be. We have the Sunset revitalization is to really be more purposeful about identifying and bringing them in to really build it the way we want it to be.
Thank you. Carmen?
Full transparency. I want to see, so as we mentioned, the committee and commissions, right? A lot of people in Renton don't know how many decisions are made in the different committee and commissions. I want to see every committee and commission meeting that's under the city of Renton recorded and put on YouTube like we do the city council meetings and the committee at large. It fosters community engagement and community accountability and full transparency, because then people know what's actually going on, and then they can contribute and they can show up and they can put forth their ideas, and then maybe they know how to apply to a certain committee and commission so they're more accessible.
There you go.
The big one that doesn't have a huge price tag, so is communication. Renton Reporter isn't nearly as amazing as it used to be, and the city, I think, could take a role in telling the residents all the wonderful programs that are out there, all the wonderful services that are available, all the opportunities that are there to reach out to people that may not necessarily know. The city offers just a tremendous amount of opportunity for all of us. And unless you know where to look, you won't find them. So I would love to see that outreach.
Thank you. James. I'm sorry, Joe.
So for me, it's really engaging the community and meeting the community where they are. There are so many technical innovations that we can put in place to make sure that we're hearing from all our community members, because some folks don't have the margin to show up to a council meeting. So we have to figure out how we could connect, and I think more forums, more utilizing technology, just more engaged with the community so we can get real feedback on decisions that we need to make.
Thank you, Joe. So we're running short on time, so I'm just going to wrap up with two last speed questions. And we're going to start with you, Carmen. If you received $1 million grant to use for the city in any way you wanted, what would you do with it and why?
$1 million.
Just, it's a drop in the bucket compared to what we normally have.
No.
It's $1 million.
Workforce development and business grants. Workforce development and small business grants. $1 million, I think, would be really good for workforce development and small business grants. Yeah.
Okay. Sticking with that answer.
Yeah.
All right. Ben, $1 million.
$1 million, it would be my fiduciary duty to immediately turn it over to the city for its budgetary process. It would no longer be my money as soon as it touched my hands. In the spirit of the question, though, I would say park funding.
Okay, so just to clarify, not to put Carmen under the bus there, if you received $1 million grant to use for the city in any way, so there's no inappropriate behavior there happening. Joe.
The first thing I would do with that $1 million, well, the only thing I would do, because you said one thing.
One thing.
I would actually invest in an innovation hub.
Innovation hub.
Yeah.
Nice. James.
Small business grants.
Small business
Period.
grants. Thank you. All right. So starting with Ben, what are 3 key societal issues you see as having a negative impact on our community?
Well, that's a fascinating question. In 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
We have, and I want to say this gently, but we have systems in place that don't serve all of us the way they should. We need to carefully look at these systems and make sure that they serve all of us. Transportation affects us amazingly. It affects a lot of, especially people first starting out without the access to good transportation is miserable. And this is a question I can't answer without hours, honestly.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's 30 seconds, but it's a speed round, so we're going to move. Joe.
The question one more time?
What are 3 key societal issues you see as having a negative impact on our community?
Definitely the fact that we have community members experiencing poverty and homelessness. Another is the fact that we don't have the right kind of transportation modes for our community members. And third, I just don't really see us incubating local small businesses.
Thank you. James.
I would say the societal homelessness and that sort of thing. I think it's still a societal issue. Quite honestly, I think just this whole COVID vaccine mask debate, I think that has a local effect in many ways. And I think also just the overall narrative on whether you trust the police or not, a defund and that sort of thing. I think that has created some polarity as well.
Thank you. Carmen.
The first thing I think that's plaguing our society is systemic and institutionalized racism. As somebody who's worked in both social services and adjacent to criminal justice, I've seen the disproportionate minority context and how Black and brown communities are overly criminalized. And so I think that is a huge area. The homeless issue is another big area that we just need to handle robustly and proactively. But lastly, I think because I'm a Northwesterner, the lack of communication, open communication. We need to talk to each other more, not behind screens, but to each other.
Thank you. So as we're running to the end of our timeline here, we're going to go with closing comments. You guys have, you ladies and gentlemen have been fabulous, and we appreciate your time and commitment to this process again. And you have 1 minute for your closing comment, and we start with Ben.
Oh, Monty, yeah. Somebody very wise told me you will campaign as you're governed. And that's why I've kept this campaign focused on Renton. Our campaign support is from Renton. My endorsements are from Renton. My campaign is run from Renton. Our campaign spends its money in Renton. I'm thankful for the endorsements of Mayor Amanda Pavoni, Dennis Law, Kathy Cochlear, council members Valerie O'Halloran, Randy Corman, and previous council members Marcy Palmer, Carol Ann Watishi, and Don Pearson. The memory of Don's love for Renton and its people strengthen all of us. I'm also thankful for the support of the people of Renton and their encouragement, and the support of the leaders that represent long-term residents like Wyman Dobson, Stephen Clymer, Robert Cugini, and to the business communities like Bob Raffel and Jason Parker, and especially for the new support I've received from Parminder Singh Bhatti, Tony Au, Ming Zhao, and Kulwant Sandhu. Meeting you one by one has been a joy, and I hope I demonstrate that I have the experience in serving Renton, the dedication to helping Renton, and the support of Renton to show you that I am the effective candidate for this position. I ask for your vote of confidence.
I was listening to intently there. Carmen.
Well, one, thank you all for coming tonight. I appreciate it. As someone who was born and raised in Renton and has also lived outside of Renton, I understand the need to bring the experience from Renton and also bring other experiences outside of Renton. I'm also endorsed by every major labor union, and those are labor unions like aerospace and machinists who represent our Boeing workers. And so I'm looking forward to working with them. I have been working with them to how we can better serve our laborers and our union workers in our city. I'm also really grateful for the community support. I did not imagine I'd ever be here. And I definitely didn't think I would be sitting here and doing this today. And so the community support from my partner and from Joe and from the Renton Residents for Change, and I'm just so grateful, especially the LGBTQI community, because they have really come out and shown me incredible support. And the National Women's Caucus and Progreso and First Mile, those that support the most marginalized communities, I am here for you and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Joe.
So as a council member, I promise to fight for marginalized and vulnerable communities. I've been endorsed by Ryan McIrvin, Ed Prince, Kim Convan, and Angelina Benedetti. My platform is really designed to make sure that we truly make Renton ahead of the curve. And I simply want to give people of Renton a say in how they're governed, because everybody should have a say in how they're governed.
Thank you. James.
All right, well, you don't have to look very far to get a good understanding of the impact that city council can have on a city. In fact, you only have to look about 15 miles to Seattle. You know, it's a sobering example of what poor council decisions can actually do to a city, to a region. You know, a homeless situation out of control, 42% growth over the last 4 years. Unfriendly business environment causing businesses to leave what seems in droves sometimes. What appears in many cases to be powerless law enforcement and people just kind of doing anything they want to do with no consequence. Arguably it's due to emotional, short-sighted decisions. And there doesn't seem to be a basis of common sense in a lot of, or practicality. So I'm running for city council to ensure that decisions are made for the city that are rooted in common sense, practicality, strategic thinking, critical thinking, and fairness to all citizens of Renton, and not in a staunch stance in a particular
Thank you,
ideology
James.
or party line.
Thank you. So on behalf of the Renton Chamber of Commerce, thank you for attending this evening. There was a lot of information, a lot of questions, and these were not all that were provided. So the Chamber is going to facilitate sending out those questions to our candidates. Hopefully they have opportunity to respond that we can then send back to you for the questions that weren't able to be answered on stage tonight. This presentation can be found on a rebroadcast. It will be rebroadcast and sent via email to our membership, and it will also be on a YouTube that the link will be sent out as well. The last thing I want to say is, again, my name is Carmen Goers. I'm a commercial banker in the South King County area, not part of Renton, but it's been an honor and a pleasure to serve you this evening. And I want to thank you for your time, thank you for your commitment, and thank you for your willingness to step out and support the community. Can we give everybody a round of applause? And with that, we say good night.
Thank you.